Hey there, everyone. Welcome to Fellowship Bible Church's Sermon Spotlight. We are coming at you each and every week with a fresh service to debrief, and I'm excited to get a chance to share kind of what God's doing in our church and hear from you guys who are sitting next to me about this past weekend and get a chance to unpack it. Emma Kate Kohler, how are you?
I'm doing good.
You are here in our co-host seat today. Welcome back.
Thank you.
It's been a little while.
Yeah.
Love to get different people's perspectives. So looking forward to hear what God was showing you this past weekend. And then the one and only Mark Carey. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Yeah.
We get so many jokes, I feel like these days, of the Marks that are in the building.
Oh, you used to be
Mark
John's.
It used to be John's, but now
You're
since
taking
we're
over.
studying the book of Mark,
Oh, yeah.
there's this, well, Mark said this. Well, are we talking about Mark Carey? Are we talking about the Word of God, Mark?
Mark sang this.
Mark sang this, yes. And it's just so it's a little confusing, it seems like, but we're studying the book of Mark. And Mark, you were in the pulpit this past week. So looking forward to unpacking that. So Emma Kate, I'll come your way first and just share kind of what you were able to take away from the weekend.
Yeah. I left this Sunday thinking, man, what an exciting service. I attended F2 on Sunday, and just the worship and the teaching and all of it, I just felt like as a congregation, we were believing what we were singing, we were believing what we were hearing, and I just felt like people were really responding to it. And one of the application questions you asked, Mark, was, are we fasting or are we feasting in our relationship with God? And it felt like we were feasting in our relationship with God this Sunday. Just the response of, yes, we were singing There's Joy in the House of the Lord, and we could feel that joy this Sunday. And I just walked away so encouraged, but also, okay, I'm feasting in this moment. What is that going to look like throughout the week? Am I going to continue to feast? Because we have that option to do so.
So it's Tuesday. How's it going there, Emma Kate?
Yeah.
Just such an encouragement. Yeah.
And that's cool to hear because, again, you don't want people to feel like that's the only time they can feast.
Right.
Is coming on a corporate gathering weekend. But you do have the energy of just the hundreds of people in one place, one space, singing together, taking the breaths and syncopation of how the timing and rhythm of the music goes to declare praises to God. There is something special to that because we can worship any time of day, but just the gathering is special. I'm glad you felt that energy. And Mark, thanks for helping suggest that closing song, just as it relates to joy. And we are people that sometimes, I'll just say, lack joy for myself, and especially coming to a church and you're like, oh, ho-hum, here we are again. Let's just go through the routine. But to be challenged in that way was helpful. So what was your takeaway, Mark, yourself, of being in the pulpit and just feeling that call or that tension of like, we need a little more infusing of that spiritual joy, and seeing that from the passage as well?
I wondered, studying the passage and even preaching it, I wondered, we hear from John's disciples. Why are they, we heard from the Pharisees, and we heard from Jesus. But I wonder what Jesus' disciples were thinking. They were following Jesus. And Micah Dirksen last week did bring out a little bit, kind of a comment. Peter was thinking, I wonder what my wife thinks. I'm sitting here eating with tax gatherers, and you wonder where they at. And we know Mark's one of the reasons why Mark wrote his book. It is a discipleship treatise. It's a manual of discipleship as he's writing to these believers in Rome. And so I don't know if I have an answer to that, but I was just curious in reading and studying. I wonder what Peter, James, John, what are these guys? They're kind of caught in the middle because, hey, why are they? They're the ones that are the focal point, and Jesus answers for them. Yeah. They didn't answer for themselves. Like, well, why not? The bridegroom's here. Here's Jesus. They didn't say that. Jesus said it. And so I'm sure they were feeling. I'm pretty sure they were feeling awkward, as it's one thing to have a paralytic healed in someone's home, And you're there in the
Yeah.
crowd, and wow, hey, we're wowing the crowd today, Jesus.
Yeah.
Good one. And now all of a sudden, you're spending an evening with tax gatherers and sinners, and everybody's pointing their finger. And maybe they begin to question, what Jesus said is not only just for the benefit of John's disciples and the Pharisees. It was for the benefit of his disciples. This is this is a time for feasting and joy, because the bridegroom is here, and it was I think an instructional message for those guys as well. And so I needed that. I need to be reminded of that we can get under the circumstances of life, and as someone says, what are you doing under the circumstances? Why are you there when we have so much to be thankful for and to have joy?
Yeah.
I love how you do bring out the joy, because when you just read at the text, that word isn't really there, but it's the implied assumption. So
Right.
doing your digging and research of what a typical wedding in that day brought out.
And and going to the John passage where John the Baptist had said the bridegroom is with us, and while he's there, the friend of the bridegroom rejoices at being there with. So it's that the idea of the feasting, and you got to believe that this is coming on the heels of the Levi party. That was not somber. I mean, think of these people who were being paid attention to by a rabbi, by a noted rabbi, by a guy who's healing people and casting out demons. I mean, Jesus was the talk of the town, and he is with them. And they must have, for the first time, had a whole new lease on life and a whole new perspective, of the freedom from shame and that type of thing. And so...
and it is a celebration.
It is a celebration.
So, I mean,
Christ brings that celebration.
My personal story, last month I went to a destination wedding, and it was an Indian family. So the traditional Indian wedding, and what that looks like, even here and now in today's culture, I would imagine is somewhat similar to what they would have been through. Just a little taste of it, because it was multiple days, multiple events, multiple activities and ceremonies, and eating and drinking and feasting and all the things that you would just think of, like that kind of Middle Eastern wedding that Jesus would have been talking about as well. So I had a taste of it, and it's special. I mean, there's something unique about an all week or an all weekend long kind of thing, and not just one small ceremony. And there's a lot of joy, a lot of celebrating, families gathering. There is just something about the camaraderie of, I'm not Indian. We stood out like a sore thumb, me and Erica, but we're in our outfits and doing our thing with our friends who are Indian and how they're getting married. And we didn't know the bride at all. And at the end of the weekend, she's like, you are part of our family. There's just this infusion of being invited to that was just something unique and special. And we're like, wow, this is cool. So just the perspective of what a wedding and joy and celebration looks like in that culture is pretty neat.
And so then bring that over to the Christian walk and the Christian life. Shouldn't that not be reflective in our life because of who Jesus is?
Absolutely. It's like those questions that you were asking at the end of the application, like, what is our mindset? Am I living in endless hope and victory in Jesus, or am I weighed down by my circumstances? And I think that's a question that I have to wrestle through every day, because there are so many times where I'm going through something and like that's my perspective, then there's no hope, because of course I'm only beholding my circumstances, but asking myself these questions and having the Lord constantly remind me, no, Emma, I've already done this. Look who I am, what I've done for you, what is now true of you. And then that's where the joy comes from, because if I'm only relying on circumstances to bring me joy, that's never going to happen.
I can remember my mother telling a story years ago of it's a missionary story of a man who was in prison for his faith, who chose you could either look at the bars of the prison bars, but every night he'd look through the bars and he could see the stars in heaven. He said, I'm going to choose to look at the stars and not the bars. They would bring him food, and he would say, the little measly crust of bread and water, and he would say, all of this and Jesus too. His attitude was, I've got so much because I have Jesus. So I just think that we can get so weighed down in a day and age where we have 24/7 cable news and being bombarded with all the horrendous, the details that we hear about, the sorrow, the sadness, that it's real. I mean, the suicides, it's just horrendous what is going on. That it can weigh us down, and I'm not saying that we go live our life with our head stuck in the sand.
Right.
But we have to have a proper perspective in life.
So we're in Luke 2, and it's just these few passages.
Mark 2.
Sorry. I don't know why I even said that. Thank you. Just too many marks, right?
Yeah.
Mark
Changing
2,
it up.
18 through 22. So just 4 quick verses. And you probably could have just given this sermon in 2 minutes and just said, hey, guys, feast or fast. What do you want to do? Joy. But it's 35 minutes of a sermon, and you probably have even things that are on the typical phrase, cutting room floor.
Yeah.
So what did you feel like that you were able to not get to from the sermon?
Yeah, Christy Vocal, who's one of our teachers here at Fellowship Bible Church, and adept at study of Old Testament, and she's been going through Isaiah. But she shared with me some helpful insights that I couldn't deal with on the sermon part, but I did want to share a little bit on this podcast because she brought up Isaiah 57 and 58. And Isaiah, as he's writing to people who have been, he's an 8th century BC prophet, but he's writing to people in the future under the Babylonian captivity and the hope of the coming Messiah and the sovereign servant, and as well as Cyrus, who's going to let him free, and all of that. And in Isaiah 57 and 58, and I think maybe just for time, there's some things going on here, like in chapter 58, related to the what's happening with the Jewish people in captivity. And they've been put there because of their sin. They've been put there as a judgment and discipline of God. And it doesn't look like they're getting it. And you go to chapter 58, cry loudly, do not hold back, raise your voice like a trumpet, declare to my people their transgression, to the house of Jacob their sin. Yet they seek me day by day and delight to know my ways, as a nation that has done righteousness and has not forsaken the ordinance of their God. They ask me for just decisions. Verse 2 says they delight in the nearness of God, all kind of a false perspective. And they say, like at verse 3, well, why have we fasted and you don't see? Why have we humbled ourselves and you don't take notice? I mean, we're doing everything right. We're fasting. We're humbling ourselves. Behold, on the day of your fast, you find your desire. And drive hard all your workers. Behold, verse 4 says, behold, you fast for contention and strife, and to strike with a wicked fist. You do not fast like you do today to make your voices heard on high. Is it a fast like this which I choose, a day for a man to humble himself? Is it for bowing one's head like a reed, for spreading out sackcloth and ashes as a bed? I mean, true, humble, contrite spirit, will you call this a fast, even an acceptable day of the Lord? And in verse 6, God says, is this not the fast which I choose? To loosen the bonds of wickedness, to undo the bands of the yoke, and to let the oppressed go free and break every yoke. And he goes on to explain what a real fast is. And Christy brought out this idea that, was Jesus bringing a little bit of Isaiah into what he was talking about with this bridegroom and this fasting? It's not wrong to fast, but they were doing it for totally all the wrong reasons.
Right.
It was a fast that was for selfish purposes. We're trying to get your attention, God. Don't you see? We're not gaining anything from this. We're doing this. And God is saying, look, that's not the fast I want.
And for the show of it.
The show of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he goes on, I think in verse, this is the fast to loose the bonds of wickedness. I want a whole different perspective of fasting. Let go of your pride. Fast on your proud heart. Put a fast on your sinful attitudes. Put a fast on you will hoard food, he says, verse 7, your clothes, your roof overhead, all these things, instead of, well, what does it say in verse 7? Isn't it not to divide your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into the house when you see the naked to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh? What are you fasting from? Why don't you fast from all the wealth and all that you really have and take care of your brethren and who are in need, and do it for my glory and honor? Fast properly then. Put that old way of doing things, that false piety, and live differently. Do a right fast. Fast from your sin. Fast from your horrible attitudes. Fast from that. So when Jesus is correcting the disciples of John and the disciples of the Pharisees, I wouldn't doubt if he had this Isaiah passage in mind, and kind of correcting them and pointing out that you're doing everything wrong. It's all fake. It's all a false pride. And if you really had a contrite heart and really wanted to fast, you do it the proper way. And I thought that was a helpful little picture. God would still want us to fast. Fast from our pride, fast from our sin, fast from our affluence, our wealth, or whatever else, and then humbly submit to him. And in that is when we're going to find joy.
And what you didn't get to at the end of verse 8, the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard.
Yeah.
Then you will call, and the Lord will answer.
Yeah.
So there's
That's
that
right.
component of, when it is done with the right heart attitude, God is going to then honor that, and he's going to get the glory, not us, as the Pharisees
right.
were doing, putting on the show. And look at us, we are the most religious people of the time, and so there's a complete dichotomy there of the right way and the wrong way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Jesus is like almost rubbing in their face. Yeah, I'm doing it the quote unquote wrong
Right.
way.
Yeah.
But look at
And
what
how
your fruits are.
And what a picture of that as he is eating with the outcasts. He's fasting from what everybody would say a religious rabbi should be doing. He said, no, I'm fasting from that. And I'm going to go feast with where the heart of God really is, with people who desperately need me. It ties in, by the way, with what Caleb had preached on 2 weeks ago. Your sins are forgiven. Well, who can forgive sins but God? Well, I came not for the righteous. I came for sinners. And the people who can really experience the feast of Jesus are those who come broken with our sin, and to experience that forgiveness and that freedom is joy. That's where our joy comes from. And we might be losing everything that this world has to offer. I mentioned, my retirement portfolio is tanking and everything else is going on. And if that's where we find our joy, we're going to be sadly disappointed.
Well, and that's where the world's joy is.
That's
and
where
look
the
at
world's
that. And they're going to be sadly
That's right. That's
just
right.
mistaken, and lack of hope and lack of true
Yeah.
confidence and joy in like what this world offers.
Yeah.
But the Pharisees knew God. They just were adding rules to what they were trying to do to worship God.
Yeah.
And that's another whole topic that we could go down of just the hypocrisy and the judgmentalism that the Pharisees had and were bringing, and that even in our own today's culture, if the three of us went out, I mean, I'm not going to name the place or location, but if we were hanging out with a bunch of quote unquote sinners and the Winchester Star got a hold of it, what would the world think?
Yeah.
Church people, Fellowship Bible Church is carousing with X, Y, and Z. Apple Blossom Festival, you name it, all the things that go into the world's
Yeah.
kind of quote unquote sinners.
Well, it says, come out from among them and be separate.
Right.
So we can throw all that
Yeah.
out. Well, what was Jesus doing then, where he was at?
Yeah.
He was bringing light. He was bringing joy, and he was bringing forgiveness. He wasn't excusing sin. He wasn't sweeping it under the carpet. Go now and sin no more. But that's why people were drawn to him, because there was an acceptance, and there was this sense of joy. I think that was there. We'll see next week. Caleb, as he gets into the next passage about the Sabbath and I think Caleb is going to talk about some of the rules and stuff of all these Sabbath and what this torturous Judaistic system was. And I just love that what Jesus said in the analogy. It's the patch on the old jeans, or the wine in the old wineskins. No, there's something new. You can't patch this up. You can't put new wine in old wineskins. It's something new. You got to have something new, and that's what he was offering. And it even in Isaiah, as Isaiah goes on in chapter 59, and of course back in chapter 53, but the suffering servant that comes in Isaiah 59 is such a great passage on the heart of the Messiah who's coming. And even in it just popped in my mind in Isaiah 66. It's verse 2. It says, to this one I will look, to him who's humble and contrite of spirit and trembles at my word. Humble, contrite in spirit, and trembles at my word. That's what the Pharisees were not.
Yeah.
And Matthew and those people, they knew that. No one had to convince them that they were unworthy of God. They knew it.
Yeah.
We've said many times here at Fellowship Bible Church, you can never be too bad to get to heaven, but you might be too good, because your goodness can get in the way of seeing your need. No problem with Levi and the prostitutes and stuff at the party. They knew they needed, and they were finding that need met in Jesus.
The example of Jesus and the rich young ruler comes to mind.
That's right.
He's doing everything right, looks the part, acts the part, and then Jesus hits him to the core.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Give up all you have and
That's right.
go serve and give it to the poor.
Yeah,
and
getting at
follow
the
me.
real heart of the issue. Are you willing? Do you see my value? And of course, once we taste and see that the Lord is good, if we can just get people to taste and see that the Lord is good, there's joy in the house of the Lord because of his presence. And I think that's what we as Christians, that was the hope of the sermon. And I think this passage is, there is something wonderful, as Peter said, joy inexpressible and full of glory if we look to Jesus. And we need each other to do that. We that's the fellowship of the saints.
Absolutely.
And when you're down, I might be up, and when I'm up, you might be down. But so we need to be in that fellowship of the saints to bring that about.
Yeah, for sure.
You had a lot of notes over there. I wanted to give you a chance to.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, again, we know that God is such a relational God. And so even the idea of him, talking about, can the wedding guest fast while the bridegroom is with them? Just this idea of, no, Pharisees, it's not about what you're doing in order to have a relationship with me. I'm here with you. Just enjoy the relationship. And I like how that was brought out in this passage. But then I did have a question, and I don't know if this really matters, but thus far in the book of Mark, we see Jesus has called some of his disciples at this point, but most of the time he is talking to the Pharisees or people in the community, like the lepers or the people, we're not really hearing from the disciples much at that point. So, we know they're here, but what do you think they're thinking about or processing, because they're not the ones asking, hey, Jesus, why aren't we fasting? It's the Pharisees and those people. So like, what's going on with them? Are they just following Jesus and just like, who is this man? Like, what is he doing? Or where are they at?
Well, and we're going to see more and more as we get into, as we go through Mark, we'll see that progress a little bit with the disciples. It's going to take a while. When we get to chapter 8, who do people say that I am? He says in verse 27, and then he says, but who do you say that I am? That's when the real crux of the matter is going to be brought to the disciples themselves. So it's this growing sense of awareness. In chapter 6, it'll be where he calls these disciples, verse 7, verse 6, he commissions them, and he summoned the 12 and began to send them out in pairs, gave them authority over unclean spirits and so forth. There is a process. Jesus initially called them, and it was a kind of a come and see. We're in the come and see, I think, period.
Okay.
They went back to their homes, their fishing boats and things like that. Come and see. And that might have been months. I'm trying to think about, I've studied this before, but it's something like maybe 10 months. It's a kind of a come and see. And then there is a come and be with me. And that is when, like Luke records it in Luke chapter 5, where Jesus is teaching and Peter, James, and John are bringing their boats in after all night of fishing, and they're cleaning their nets while Jesus, in other words, they're not fully devoted.
Yeah.
And that's when Jesus gets into Peter's boat and says, go out to the deep, let down your nets for a catch. And he does, and the whole boat. And then Peter says, my Lord, my God, I mean, you depart from me. I'm a sinful man. And then it says, and they left everything and followed. So it was a process of time. And then you've got that final 21 months or whatever it is when they really are engaged with Jesus. And then the final is, as he's resurrected in the Great Commission, it's now go, and I'm with you always. So it's come and see, come and be with me, and then go into all the world and proclaim it.
It's an interesting observation. And then when you get to the next chapter, I'm just looking ahead, trying to follow where you're going, Mark.
Yeah.
You know, that's where it says the 12 are chosen, and Jesus appointed them
To be with him.
to be with him. So
come and be with me.
this is before that phase of really declaring, here's the 12, here's the be with me component.
So they're just dabbling. It's come and see.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel
And
like The
they're-
Chosen does an interesting job of capturing that, the TV, the show.
Yeah,
Of just
I
how
think
they're kind of
so.
in the background, just like watching and talking amongst themselves, taking
Having
notes.
doubts,
you know,
wondering
like
what's
wondering
going-
what's going
Yeah.
on. It's
Yeah.
just a fascinating kind of perspective of
Yeah,
putting,
especially trying to
visual.
size each other up. I mean, they did a great job in The Chosen about, when Matthew was called. And it was like,
Yes.
because Peter and James and John, the fishermen, Andrew, they had to pay their taxes to that guy probably. They didn't like him. And now
Yeah.
Jesus calls him and then makes him or forces them to go and have a party with him. Well, I don't know what was going on in their minds.
Yeah.
But they're certainly getting a feel for who it is that they're following.
But even in this passage is a teachable moment. Jesus
Yes.
is using it for
Yes.
teaching multiple people at the same time.
Right.
Of just what he says, how he's acting,
Yeah.
just so many things. Just
Yeah.
all about him is being a teacher.
Jesus had directed his words toward the disciples of John and the disciples of the Pharisees. What happened to the mind and the hearts of the disciples when he said, the bridegroom is here. This is time to
Yeah.
feast. And they might have said, that's why we did that last night. That's why we're seeing things differently. That's why everywhere we're going, there is joy. And they were sensing it, I'm sure, in their own spirits.
It's growing their faith as well,
Yeah.
growing their just belief in him
Yeah.
and seeing all the different things
Now,
going on.
what
But their faith is always
Yeah.
tested.
And when we get into some of these other chapters, 6, the feeding of the 5,000, and then is it chapter 7? No, chapter 8, the feeding of the 4,000. It's so clear. After the feeding of the 5,000, had all these basket, food left over, and feeding the 4,000. They had, I think, all these baskets of food left. And then he said, "Okay, let's get in the boat and go on the other side." And they're going across the Sea of Galilee. And then all of a sudden said, "Wait a minute. Who forgot to pack the picnic basket? We don't have any food." And Jesus says, is asking them. It's verse 4 of chapter 8 says that his disciples answered and says, "Where will anyone find enough bread here in this desolate place to satisfy all these people?" And Jesus said, "Well, how many loaves do you have here?" And then he goes on and warns them later, then watch out for the leaven of the Pharisees. And then verse 16 of chapter 8 says, they began to discuss among themselves the fact that they had no bread. No one packed the picnic basket. And Jesus says, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Don't you remember and understand? Do you have a hardened heart? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets were left over? 12. and then when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full did you pick up? 7. And don't you understand? You're asking. So it's a growing thing that it's a fun book on discipleship that we are going to keep bringing out. And
because I think that's really interesting, because a lot of times, like, I'll read this and I'll be like, how could they not get it? But because he was right there. But it is that, like you said, it's this discipleship, it's this growing, it's their growing in their relationship with him, which I think is also true for us. Like, I don't know now what I know about God, what I will know in 5 years and 10 years, and so on and so forth. And so it's this, he's relational, and it's slow, and it's all about knowing him. And I've never thought about it that way before. But that's exciting.
And again, that is the value of the body of Christ, because there are believers who have been walking for many years, and so we need to learn from them so that we can also grow, but bring someone else. There are youth watching you, and our children are watching us, and grandchildren. There are the stories of the biographies of Christians from the past that can be so meaningful. And we have a rich history of people that we can learn from and be reminded of. That God. This morning, Jim Poole is in Nigeria. Scott McManigal, our missions pastor, couldn't go because he's still recuperating from his knee issues. But he Zoomed the meeting, and he asked if I would get on in the very early part this morning and greet the pastors in Nigeria. So I did, and I just reminded them how much they mean to us, because we're learning from them, that we appreciate their lives of faithfulness, and it means so much for us. So that's how the body of life of Christ works.
Right. And
I don't want to be around gloomy, negative Christians. That I just it can be depleting of our spirit. But give me someone who, in the midst of all the pain, can just minister to your spirit and have the joy of the Lord. And there's tons of them out there. But
it's great. So this coming weekend is Palm Sunday. We'll continue in Mark. Then we have Easter weekend. Paint us a quick picture of where the next several weeks are going with the sermon times.
Well, if you know, let me know. Let's clue me. No. Well, Easter is Easter. But I am going to do. I think I only have like 20 minutes or something, 25 minutes.
Whatever the Spirit leads.
Yeah, right. Oh, don't say that. But what I want to do there. Well, you can come and see. You'll find out. But when you get the next passage into Mark is again another one of these demon stories. It comes up a lot. There's that spiritual warfare, and we've the preaching team. We felt it was important to maybe step away from the verse by verse of Mark and dig a little deeper in some of these spiritual warfare texts. So we're going to do a 3-week kind of introduction to spiritual warfare because it keeps coming up in Mark's
Demon
gospel.
possession keeps coming up.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Like, what does that look like in me? And,
Yeah.
and how did Jesus handle it? What's happening for us
What's
today?
today?
All so many different
Yeah.
questions. That
So for 3
circle
weeks,
back.
we'll deal a little bit with
Yeah.
that. We won't. You can't do a real deep dive in 3 weeks, but we're going to do a little much more of a deep dive than
Great.
just in a single sermon to match it on.
We'll pepper everyone with those questions
Yeah.
when it happens.
Yeah. So that'll be in May.
Great. Yep. Thank you. And so you mentioned Easter. Come out for that, obviously. So just a quick heads up. There's the Good Friday times of worship opportunities where we have a prayer vigil happening all day from 7 o'clock to 7 o'clock. Come to the fireside room, open house. There's be different questions and just guides that'll help you just center around the cross as you pray through some of those things. And then there's 2 different worship gatherings that are happening at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and 7 o'clock. And just expect a little bit longer than normal because we're going to be reading through the book of Mark together in a creative and dramatic way. And already the last couple weeks, I know Rose has unpacked that, so I won't get into too many more details, but just come expectantly and to hear from the Word of God during those 2 times. And then
The
Easter,
3 o'clock is
3 o'clock is
children's ministry. Will
Correct. And we'll live stream as well. So bring your kids for that time for 3 o'clock. And then Easter weekend, you have Saturday night option for all the typical Saturday crowd, 5 o'clock, and then 4 services on Sunday. Different times, so mark it down, 8, 9:30, and 11, with 11 o'clock downstairs and upstairs as well. So be ready. Easter is here. I'm excited, and we'll continue to bring the joy to our gatherings to just encourage one another. Emma Kate, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Mark, once again, I love the unpacking and super helpful. Well, once again, guys, just thank you for watching and listening. Share your thoughts, share your questions and comments with us. You can pass along to your friends that you can find this podcast anywhere, whether it be YouTube or Google or Spotify or Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Share it with your friends because you can continually get fed more information of God's Word each and every time you listen. So the fact of the matter, guys, is that sermons are not meant to just take an hour, but rather transform a lifetime. Until then, much love. God bless.